Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like a guest in your own mind? Where you gave everything, time, presence, love, yet somehow kept losing pieces of yourself along the way? You weren't screaming, you weren't hurting out loud, but deep inside, something sacred was leaking. Not because you were weak, but because you didn't notice how slowly you were disappearing, smiling just right, responding fast enough, shrinking your truth to keep the peace. At first it looked like love, but over time it felt like emotional erosion. You stopped feeling like you. Modern relationships often come dressed in intimacy, but stitched with quiet control. Dopamine compliance loops, unspoken scorecards, and 1,000 unsaid expectations disguised as care. You find yourself decoding ghost replies, rehearsing your worth before every conversation, navigating a maze of, "Are you okay?" while silently asking, "Do I still matter if I stop performing?" This isn't about heartbreak. It's about emotional bandwidth theft. How easy it is to trade your clarity for closeness, your stillness for someone else's storms. And here's the twist. Intelligent people begin to sense this not because they read more books or attended more workshops, but because they've tasted the fatigue of being constantly available, endlessly understanding, and dangerously agreeable. They learn, usually the hard way, that in love, what you avoid matters more than what you give, because giving is only noble when it doesn't cost you your center. This is where stoicism becomes quietly revolutionary. Marcus Aurelius never wrote about dating apps or situationships, but he did write this: "If you are disturbed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke." In relationships, that means your peace is not handed to you. It is guarded by what you refuse to entertain. So in this video, we're not going to talk about how to be more loving. We're going to talk about how to be less lost, about the quiet discipline of not overreacting, not over-explaining, not proving, not chasing. We'll explore 10 powerful things intelligent people avoid in relationships, not to distance themselves from love, but to protect their ability to show up whole. Because emotional intelligence isn't just about understanding others. It's about having the courage to stop abandoning yourself. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do for your heart is to stop offering it to situations that require you to vanish in order to belong. Let's begin. One of the most common and least recognized forms of exhaustion in a relationship comes from the need to prove yourself, not overtly, not through grand declarations, but in subtle, everyday ways. You explain your boundaries like a lawyer justifying a case. You repeat your values, hoping they'll finally be understood. You perform your depth through carefully chosen words, hoping your presence will be enough to stay wanted. But beneath all of it lies a quiet fear. If I don't present myself the right way, they won't stay. This is identity proving, a hidden game of self-defense masked as self-expression. And intelligent people, especially those who've been praised for being the strong one, the thoughtful one, the put-together one, begin to sense the trap. Because when you're constantly explaining who you are, what you're really saying is, you're not sure you'll be loved if you stop. It often begins innocently. A partner doesn't quite get you, so you elaborate. They misunderstand your silence, so you explain. They question your decisions, so you list your reasons. But over time, this becomes a belief-baiting narrative, a loop where your identity is only as solid as your ability to defend it. And here's the danger. In trying to be understood, you slowly stop being at peace. Every comment becomes a test, every disagreement a performance. Your self-worth becomes a hostage to their comprehension. And that's not connection, that's quiet erasure. The Stoics warned against this emotional fragility dressed up as communication. Epictetus said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish." In other words, if your peace depends on being understood, you've already lost it. Intelligent people start doing something radical. They stop explaining. They let misunderstandings sit unanswered. They let silence do the filtering. They stop proving and start observing, because they know that true connection doesn't require constant translation. This doesn't mean arrogance. It means restraint. It means giving your energy to those who don't need you to audition. It means loving from a place where your presence speaks louder than your resume of traits. Because when you need someone to get you in order to feel safe, you've placed your identity outside yourself. And anything you place outside yourself can be rejected, reshaped, or erased. So here's the shift. Stop performing who you are. Start inhabiting it. Say less, mean more. And remember, being seen isn't about being explained. It's about being felt. Because intelligent people know you don't owe anyone a PowerPoint presentation of your personality just to deserve love. And sometimes the deepest self-respect is letting someone misunderstand you and still choosing your peace. There's a kind of gambling that doesn't happen in casinos. It happens in relationships. You send the message and wait. You share something vulnerable and hope it lands softly. You lower your guard and then refresh the screen over and over, watching silence grow louder with every minute that passes. This is emotional gambling, the quiet act of placing your peace in someone else's pocket, hoping they'll handle it gently. But more often than not, they don't. Intelligent people, especially those who felt the sting of waiting for a response that never came, start to see the pattern. They recognize how easily relationships become roulette tables. One text can shift your mood. One like, one tone, one delayed reply, and suddenly your nervous system is in a spiral. You're not connecting. You're chasing closure. You're not being loved. You're betting on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this time, you won't be disappointed. But here's the Stoic truth. You cannot entrust your inner calm to someone who hasn't earned access to it. Epictetus reminds us, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. In other words, you pushed the chips forward, you sat at the table, you played a game that demanded your emotional currency and offered no guarantee in return. Emotional gambling looks like vulnerability, but it's often desperation in disguise. It's not openness, it's overexposure. You hand over your thoughts, your fears, your hopes, not because they've been earned, but because you need reassurance. But reassurance is not connection. And hope, when weaponized against your peace, becomes a form of self-abandonment. I once heard someone say, I wasn't waiting for him to love me. I was waiting for him to make me feel lovable. That's the trap. When your sense of worth becomes tied to someone else's reply time, tone, or ability to soothe your doubt, you're no longer in a relationship. You're in a cycle of silent self-betrayal. But intelligent people choose differently. They don't stop caring. They stop wagering. They no longer give away their clarity just to feel momentarily seen. They let space be space. They let silence speak louder than sweet words. And they remember, not all connection is currency, and not all waiting is wise. So next time your heart races after hitting send, pause. Ask yourself, am I reaching for love or gambling with my peace? Because intelligent people understand, you don't have to be unread just to feel real. And the bravest thing you can do for your heart is to take it out of the game. There's a moment in every relationship when you realize you're not being talked with, you're being talked into, not because the person is cruel, not because they don't love you, but because you've slowly become their emotional landfill. Their day went wrong, you're the default. Their stress spikes, you're the release valve. Their rage, their anxiety, their unchecked chaos, it all gets dropped at your feet, like your presence is a bottomless bin for what they refuse to process. And at first, it feels like connection. They trust me. They open up to me. I'm their safe space. But safety without reciprocity becomes suffocation, because there's a difference between support and being constantly consumed. One honors your space, the other invades it without asking. Intelligent people start recognizing this subtle violation, not through big betrayals, but through the quiet depletion they feel after every conversation. They begin to notice that some people don't want solutions. They don't want dialogue. They want a stage. They're not sharing, they're offloading. And slowly your nervous system becomes a storage unit for storms that don't belong to you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." And here's how that applies. If someone constantly empties into you and you never draw a line, it's not just their doing, it's your unspoken permission. Being the emotional dump bin often comes from a noble place. You want to help, you want to be present, but presence without boundaries becomes exposure, and exposure without restoration becomes erasure. You slowly stop knowing where you end and their stress begins. Intelligent people reclaim this line. They begin to ask, am I listening or absorbing? They learn to pause when the story becomes a monologue. They step back when being there for someone starts to feel like abandoning themselves. They understand that being a sanctuary doesn't mean becoming a sponge. This isn't cold, it's clarity. It's the wisdom of knowing that your energy is sacred, not just something to be mopped up by whoever is bleeding emotionally nearby, because even the most loving hearts need limits. So here's the shift. The next time someone starts pouring into you, pause. Check in with yourself. Are they inviting you in or unloading onto you? Because intelligent people don't confuse proximity with permission, and they've learned that holding space for someone else's pain should never mean losing all of yours. There's a kind of exhaustion that wears a smile, a kind that says, I'm fine, even when your heart is quietly collapsing under the weight of everything you've chosen not to say. You laugh at the right times, not at the right cues. Stay cheerful so others don't worry. And somewhere along the way, you forget what your real face feels like. This is the art of performing emotions, not expressing them, not processing them, but packaging them for the comfort of others. And make no mistake, it's rewarded. People call you strong, emotionally mature, easy to be around. But beneath the applause is a quiet erosion, because when your sadness must be softened, your anger filtered, your anxiety hidden behind agreeable tones, your inner truth starts starving for oxygen. Intelligent people begin to feel this, not because they lack empathy, but because they've spent years being the balanced one, the emotionally safe one, the one who translates every feeling into something digestible for others. But there's a hidden cost. Performing emotions means constantly editing your truth to avoid disruption. And over time, that editing becomes erasure. The Stoics never said, don't feel. They said, observe without attachment. There's a world of difference between emotional discipline and emotional denial. Marcus Aurelius wrote, you don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. But that doesn't mean you have to fake joy when you feel hollow. It simply means you can feel without performative urgency. Intelligent people stop rehearsing their emotional mask. They allow space between stimulus and performance. They no longer smile just to keep others comfortable. They know that real connection doesn't come from being constantly pleasant. It comes from being quietly real. I once met someone who was always upbeat, always good. One day when no one else was around, they whispered, I don't remember what it's like to cry without apologizing for it. That sentence haunted me, because it wasn't sadness they feared, it was judgment. And judgment has trained so many of us to turn grief into jokes, anxiety into productivity, heartbreak into silence. But intelligent people begin to say no to that conditioning. They practice emotional integrity, not emotional theater. They don't cry for attention, but they no longer suppress tears for approval. They don't dramatize, but they also don't dilute. So if you feel the urge to smile through your pain, pause. Ask, am I being real or rehearsed? Because you don't owe anyone the version of you that's always okay. And intelligent people know sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to feel what you feel, quietly, without packaging it for anyone else. One of the most dangerous forms of control is the kind that wears concern as its costume. It doesn't yell, it doesn't demand. It simply whispers, "I'm just worried about you," right before it crosses your boundary. It looks like love, but feels like shrinkage. Like your autonomy is slowly being rearranged to make someone else feel secure. This is control in disguise. And intelligent people, especially those who have been deeply empathetic their whole lives, begin to notice the pattern. It starts subtly. Your partner offers unsolicited advice, frames it as support. They monitor your decisions, call it protection. They question your independence, label it fear. And somewhere inside you, a quiet unease grows. Because while their words say, "I love you," their energy says, "I need to manage you to feel safe." And that's not intimacy. That's a power leak, a soft-spoken override of your self-trust. Stoicism doesn't confuse control with connection. Epictetus taught, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. In modern love, that means don't say you care if what you really want is compliance. Intelligent people learn to recognize when support becomes surveillance. They sense when they're no longer seen as a partner, but as a project. And they stop mistaking micromanagement for intimacy, because real love expands you. It doesn't edit you. They begin to reclaim their inner authority. They say, "I hear your concern, but this is my path." They no longer adjust their dreams to soothe someone else's fear. They know that compassion without clarity becomes coercion, and relationships built on quiet control always lead to loud regret. I once heard someone say, "He always wanted to protect me until protection became permission." That's the line. The moment love stops being a shelter and starts being a leash. So here's the shift. The next time someone offers care, ask, is this comfort or control? Are they sitting beside your choices or trying to script them? Because intelligent people don't confuse love with possession, and they've learned that the most dangerous kind of manipulation is the one that pretends it's looking out for you. And sometimes choosing your own voice over someone else's concern is the highest form of self-respect. There's a subtle form of self-erasure that happens when you feel the need to justify your every no. You say it softly, then you add context, then you apologize, and before you know it, your boundary has become a negotiation, one that leaves you drained and disoriented. This is the trap of over-explaining boundaries. It doesn't look like weakness. It often masquerades as empathy, but at its core, it's a quiet fear. If I don't explain myself thoroughly, I won't be respected. I might lose them. Intelligent people, especially those who've struggled to be the kind one, begin to realize this pattern. They see how easily a simple statement like, "I'm not available for that," turns into a long paragraph, filled with disclaimers, softened by politeness, and diluted by guilt. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not PowerPoint presentations. They're not essays waiting for approval. They are internal truths, not external invitations. The Stoics would call this emotional self-sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, never be ashamed to be helped, but also never be afraid to say what is essential. That's the lesson. Say what's essential and let the silence carry the rest. Over-explaining boundaries often stems from an outdated belief that being understood is more important than being respected. But intelligent people choose a new belief. They begin to trust that clarity doesn't need backup vocals. They stop performing worthiness. They say less and mean it fully. This is what we might call a clarity leak trap, when truth gets buried under the weight of too much context. But intelligent people stop leaking. They speak cleanly. They set boundaries not with aggression, but with precision. And they don't decorate their truth just to soften someone else's reaction. I once knew someone who said, "Every time I told her no, I felt like I had to prove I wasn't a bad person." That's the weight we carry when we confuse kindness with self-abandonment. So here's the shift. The next time you feel the urge to over-explain your boundary, pause. Ask yourself, am I clarifying or apologizing for having a limit? Because intelligent people know that a clear no is not a door slammed shut. It's a door respectfully closed with both hands. And sometimes the most powerful sentence in any relationship is one that ends with a full stop. There's a kind of chaos that doesn't come from the world. It comes from being hooked by everything in it. A comment, a shift in tone, a sigh that sounds like judgment. And suddenly, you're not present. You're performing a response to every flicker of discomfort. This is the trap of constant reaction. You feel compelled to explain, to defend, to fix, to respond, not because it's necessary, but because silence feels unsafe. But intelligent people, especially those who've lived in high conflict or emotionally unstable relationships, begin to realize that reacting to everything is not strength. It's hypervigilance in disguise, a survival strategy rehearsed so well it looks like care. But beneath the surface, it's erosion. You stop choosing your responses and start outsourcing your peace to every emotional breeze. The Stoics saw this clearly. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But in relationships, that means more than restraint. It means discernment. Knowing that not every message needs a reply, not every mood requires your analysis, not every moment is yours to manage. Some call this a cognitive leak. When your mind is so porous, it absorbs every emotional cue in the room. And intelligent people begin to seal that leak. They stop matching energy. They stop letting someone else's urgency set the rhythm of their nervous system. I remember someone who used to flinch at every text bubble. They'd say, "I just don't want to be misunderstood." But what they really meant was, "I've made other people's moods my responsibility." And that's the subtle violence of overreaction. It makes you forget you have a choice. So intelligent people begin to reclaim that choice. They pause, breathe, observe. Sometimes they respond. Often they don't. Not because they don't care, but because they've learned. Presence is not the same as participation. You don't have to prove you're attentive by reacting to every ripple. You don't need to chase resolution for every tension. And you don't owe immediate access to anyone who confuses your silence with indifference. Because intelligent people know calm isn't passive, it's protective. And sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. In the age of instant everything, silence feels suspicious. A delayed reply feels like rejection. And so we perform availability, not because we're present, but because we're afraid that if we're not seen, we'll be forgotten. You respond quickly, not because you're free, but because you don't want to seem distant. You stay online, not because you're engaged, but because absence feels like abandonment. But here's the hidden truth. Being constantly reachable doesn't make you more loved. It just makes you more exhausted. Intelligent people begin to sense the distortion. They notice how availability has become a performance, how seen 1 minute ago feels like a test, how response time becomes a measurement of care. And slowly they realize their worth is being tied to how fast they can reply, how often they can show up, how much access they can offer. But real connection doesn't live in the timestamp. It lives in the depth. The Stoics didn't have smartphones, but they understood this trap. Seneca wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it. Intelligent people apply this to love by reclaiming their time, not from responsibility, but from reflex. They stop confusing urgency with importance. They stop trading their peace for presence. This cycle becomes addictive, an emotional loop where speed equals security. But intelligent people break the loop. They leave messages on read, not out of disrespect, but out of sovereignty. They stop apologizing for their silence. They stop narrating their unavailability. I once heard someone say, "If I don't answer fast, they think I'm upset." But here's the truth. If your presence must be performed to be respected, it was never respected to begin with. Intelligent people learn that love should never require the sacrifice of your rhythm. So they build new habits. They respond when they're ready. They log off without guilt. They take space without making it dramatic, because they know that real intimacy doesn't rush. It breathes. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to let someone miss you while you reclaim yourself. There's a dangerous kind of compromise that doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a slow disappearance. You give in, you stay quiet, you go along again. And on the surface, it looks like maturity, like keeping the peace, like being the bigger person. But inside, you know the truth. You're not compromising. You're abandoning yourself. Intelligent people begin to feel this distinction. They remember the moments when saying yes wasn't agreement. It was self-betrayal. When shrinking their needs felt easier than being labeled difficult. When holding back their truth seemed like the only way to stay loved. But love that costs your wholeness isn't love. It's performance under pressure. Some call this a quiet erosion, when you don't break but slowly bend until you can't find yourself in the mirror. And intelligent people, they stop bending. The Stoics taught us that clarity begins when we know what to preserve. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." Intelligent people take this seriously. They stop labeling their silence as strength. They stop calling self-erasure a virtue. They begin to treat their needs not as inconveniences, but as boundaries worth honoring. I once spoke to someone who said, "He never told me to change, but I kept changing just to keep him comfortable." That sentence speaks volumes, because not all manipulation is intentional. Sometimes we volunteer for it just to feel safe. But safety without self is not love. It's confinement. It's a soft cage built from your own compliance. So intelligent people begin to ask different questions. Am I compromising or disappearing? Am I making room or being erased? And they start choosing differently. They stop folding themselves into shapes that don't fit. They stop trading their authenticity for approval. Because intelligent people know real love doesn't require you to disappear, and compromise should never cost you your reflection. Sometimes the most honest thing you can say is, "This isn't working for me," and not apologize for it. Some wounds don't scream. They whisper through repetition. You find yourself in familiar arguments, reacting with intensity that doesn't match the moment. You replay old stories, not because you enjoy the pain, but because they become scripts to rehearse to abandon. I've always been this way. I just attract the wrong ones. I knew they'd leave, like the others. And just like that, your past becomes the co-writer of your present. Intelligent people begin to notice when love becomes a stage for their unhealed parts to perform. They see how easily we bring our childhood into our partnership, how old wounds masquerade as instincts, and how familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar peace. But here's the quiet truth. Just because a feeling is real doesn't mean it's current. The Stoics warned us, beware of stories that become cages. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If your thoughts are tinted with old betrayals, you'll paint every relationship with suspicion, even when no one's holding the brush but you. This is what some call a belief loop, When past pain creates present behavior that recreates the very pain you're trying to escape. It's not self-awareness, it's self-sabotage wrapped in nostalgia. I once heard someone say, "I always prepare to be left, so I never really show up." That's not caution. That's premeditated loneliness. But intelligent people break the loop. They stop treating memory as prophecy. They stop testing people based on wounds others left behind. They stop assigning today's love the burden of yesterday's loss. They ask new questions. Is this fear mine or inherited? Am I seeing them or my past projected onto them? And in those questions, they create distance from the story, not the person. They stop saying, "That's just who I am," and start saying, "That's who I became to survive, but I don't need that version anymore." Because intelligent people know healing isn't forgetting the pain, it's refusing to rehearse it. And sometimes the bravest form of growth is to stop reading the same page and start writing something new. So here we are, 10 things, 10 shifts, 10 quiet refusals that don't scream, don't rage, don't dramatize, but speak with the steady voice of self-respect. And maybe, if you've made it this far, something in you has already started to soften, not in weakness, but in recognition. Because at some point, most of us were taught that love is about how much we give, how much we tolerate, how far we bend. But the Stoics offer something different. They remind us that love without boundaries is not virtue, it's vulnerability left unattended. And that peace is not the absence of people, but the presence of self. You don't need to be more reactive to be more caring. You don't need to be more available to be more lovable. And you certainly don't need to over-explain, over-perform, or overextend just to keep someone close. The right person won't require your erosion. They'll protect your edges. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." In love, that might sound like this. Stop rehearsing what love should look like. Start becoming the kind of person who loves without losing themselves. And maybe you've realized now that emotional intelligence isn't about knowing everything. It's about releasing what's no longer yours to carry. The need to explain, the urgency to respond, the addiction to approval, the echoes of old pain. Let them fall. Let them dissolve. Not with bitterness, but with calm. Because intelligent people don't just avoid drama, they avoid disappearing into dynamics that make them forget their worth. So ask yourself quietly, which of these have I tolerated? Which of these have I normalized? And which am I finally ready to stop rehearsing? There's no need to rush the answer. Let it arrive like still water, calm, clear, and true. Because in the end, relationships don't require perfection, they require presence. But presence that's rooted, boundaried, alive. And the most intelligent kind of love is the one where both people remain fully themselves and still choose to stay. If something in this video spoke to you, not in volume, but in quiet recognition, leave a comment below with, "I choose peace and love." No need to explain, no story required, just a signal to yourself and to others that you're no longer performing for closeness, but returning to clarity. And if someone came to mind, someone who's been giving too much, reacting too fast, shrinking too often, send this their way, not as a fix, not as a hint, but as a quiet offering, a reminder that love can be soft and strong. That presence doesn't require performance. If you'd like more videos like this, calm, reflective, rooted in Stoic thought but shaped for the emotional storms of modern life, subscribe to Stoic Viva and tap the bell. Not for noise, not for hype, but for moments like this. Moments where we breathe, reflect. Remember that we don't have to lose ourselves to love someone well. So wherever you are in your story, Whether in love, healing, letting go, or beginning again, stay grounded, stay discerning, and as always, stay stoic.